Hey everybody, in this video we're going to be talking about 1983's Cycle of the Werewolf. Noah will be showing the original small press edition from Land of Enchantment, and I'll be showing the much more common and much more affordable Signet paperback editions from 1985. I'll give a little bit of background on how the book came to be, as well as my thoughts on the story itself.
And here is the trade edition of the Cycle of the Werewolf. By Land of Enchantment, and it's basically the same exact book as what I just showed you with the limited. Here's the cover, only it doesn't have a signed tip sheet. What I didn't show you were the illustrations. It does have black and white and full color illustrations throughout. And I can't recall how many of these were printed, but I don't think too many. It was a specialty book, right? So you couldn't get this like in a bookstore. You had to order it from either Land of Enchantment or like, the used and rare booksellers of the day. I probably got I want to say I paid $35 for this. In the mid to late 80s, it was not rare. It was not something that was sold for a lot of money. It was very, it was around. I mean, people, didn't really seek this out. I guess much like the early gunslinger, the gunslinger in the early days was not a sought out book, but it's, it's a nice story, and you guys know the story of this. It was originally supposed to be a calendar, and ended up being published as a book. So cool, but I don't have a ton of stuff to say about it. And that's Cycle of the Werewolf from Land of Enchantment.
Thanks as always to Noah for showing yet another amazing first edition. While the channel is called SK First Editions, and we really try to focus on worldwide first trade editions, limited editions, special editions, and what have you, I felt like as a collector, and this channel is for collectors, that it was a good idea to make an exception in the case of Cycle of the Werewolf. The original hardcover release was released in 7,500 copies, and so it's not a limited edition per se, it's a small press edition, and that type of print run is pretty common for small presses. But normal Stephen King trade hardcovers of the same era were publishing in hundreds of thousands of copies in first edition and selling out. So in some ways, the Land of Enchantment Cycle of the Werewolf is kind of like a limited edition. The worldwide first edition, which is really special, but not something that a lot of people were even aware of, let alone able to purchase and add to their collections. It was not listed in the works by lists of contemporary books, so it flew under the radar of a lot of people. And it wasn't until the release of the trade paperback that I think most people even knew it was a thing, or at the very least had a chance to actually acquire it and experience it for themselves. So in this video, we're going to talk about some trade paperback editions as well. So the first trade paperback edition of Cycle of the Werewolf has an embossed cover. Later printings have the image, but give up on they lose the embossed design. The name, title are embossed as well. There's a price, make sure I say it right. Yep, $8.95 up there in the corner. Do you want to look for that? It's also on the spine, $8.95. It's pretty easy to tell if you have a first printing, because on the copyright page there's a full number line, and it will say, what does it say? First Signet printing, April 1985. and that includes the full number line. And of course, it has the same content, the wonderful artwork, paintings, the drawings and the sketches and the paintings by Bernie Wrightson. It has the same content as the Land of Enchantment edition. It's just smaller, and it was produced in much larger numbers, and it's much easier to find. So in April 1985, you could pay $8.95 for Cycle of the Werewolf. The movie version, Silver Bullet, came out shortly thereafter, and by October 1985, you could pay $9.95, so a whole dollar more, to get this book, Silver Bullet, which includes Cycle of the Werewolf, the entire script for the movie Silver Bullet, as well as photos from the movie, side by side. And maybe you're not interested in the movie script or photos from the movie, and that's totally fine. But gosh, just like 6 or 7 months after the first trade paperback comes out, this new book comes out that's twice as big, has all kinds of extra content, photos from the movie, and still, of course, has it starts with Cycle of the Werewolf. So Silver Bullet, there's the cover, price of $9.95. If you tilt it on its side, you can see the pricing information on the front cover. It's also on the spine and on the copyright page. On the copyright page, once again, there's a full number line and the language, first printing October 1985. Another selling point for this book is that it includes a new foreword by Stephen King, it's an interesting story how Cycle of the Werewolf even came to be. And the first line of his introduction, I will read: "Silver Bullet is probably the only movie ever made that began as a calendar proposal." So anyway, we'll talk more about that here in a minute, but the first trade paperback, Cycle of the Werewolf, and the movie tie-in, first printing, Silver Bullet, both from 1985. So at the World Fantasy Convention in 1979, a slightly or very inebriated King was approached by Christopher Zavisa, who was the founder and publisher of Land of Enchantment Press. And that entire press, that imprint, was created by Zavisa to promote and publish the work of illustrator Bernie Wrightson. And Zavisa had the idea for a calendar that would feature artwork by Wrightson and text by King to the tune of 500 words per segment. So 500 words per month across 12 months, about 6,000 words total, if I'm doing my math correctly. And I don't know if Stephen King can even limit himself to 6,000 words when he's writing out his shopping list. But anyway, he agrees to the idea. He thinks it's unique, thinks it's interesting, and he sets about working on it slowly, lower priority. So he does a little bit, puts it aside, can't really find a groove with it, and he finds the format of the 500 word segments very limiting, even though he's come up with the idea of cycles of the moon and full moon and werewolves and all of that came pretty easily, pretty early on. He's finding the format to be very limiting, and it's not, and it goes on for a couple of years, with Zavisa periodically reaching out to sort of ping Stephen King and say, hey, how are things going on the book? and Stephen King saying, "Oh, plugging right along." But it wasn't until he got to the July segment and the sort of set piece around the 4th of July that things really started to click. And he was able to finish the remainder of the segments in rapid succession. And I understand that he did this like during a trip, a vacation that he was trying to take, maybe just with his wife, maybe with his whole family, but they're on the plane, he's riding on the plane has to come back because some guy on board had a heart attack. So it comes back, and while they're waiting to get on their new flight, writes a little bit more. Just in these little stolen moments of this vacation, he has these ideas, and he finishes out the book. And it is clearly obvious that it will no longer excuse me, it will no longer fit in a calendar. So he reaches out to Zavisa and he says, "Hey, I'm all done, but here's where we're at." And he says that Zavisa was delighted, and Stephen King got the impression that he probably wanted a book all along, but maybe just was too nervous to ask. Like approach Stephen King at a convention and say, "Hey, would you write a book for my small press to publish?" But regardless, he was delighted with the results, and Cycle of the Werewolf is what we eventually enjoyed, and it was quickly optioned for the movies. And like I mentioned earlier, the movie version, Silver Bullet, was released shortly thereafter. And once the paperback editions were released and were commonly available, the book started showing up on the books by Stephen King lists at the beginning of his other books, and it took its place as a rightful and legitimate part of the Stephen King universe, although a very unique one, and the only work in his vast bibliography that started life as a concept for a calendar, which is kind of interesting. Even as a book with 12 chapters that are around the cycles of the moon, there are some standout and interesting moments in Cycle of the Werewolf, some vignettes, some scenes that are pretty powerful. But overall, I find the artificiality of the format, even though it's much broader than it originally would have been had it been published as a calendar, I still find it limiting. And the book as a whole, I think, suffers because it suffers engagement-wise. It doesn't have the time it needs to really sprawl out and build suspense and tell the story that it's trying to tell. So to me, even though it's a legitimate part of Stephen King's bibliography, it still feels more like an experiment to me, more like a curio piece. I saw the movie years and years ago when I was a teenager, and I hardly remember anything about it, and the book is kind of the same way. So it's a bit like Creepshow, although Creepshow is just straight up a comic book or a graphic novel. The marriage of text and illustration in Cycle of the Werewolf always lump it together. It's from the same era of the early 80s, and there are interesting curiosities, but and they're valid and they're worthwhile, but definitely for completionists, I mean, if it comes up, if you find a good copy for a good price, pick it up. The Land of Enchantment, Cycle of the Werewolf, is definitely one of my grails, and one of the things that I'm continually on the lookout for, but it's definitely not at the top of my list. There are other things that I enjoy more and that I I desire more, but it is an interesting piece and well worth seeking out. So I thank you for your time. I hope this video has been interesting and entertaining as always. And thank you for your support. Thank you to Noah for your support in helping make these videos possible. And wherever you are, I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I will talk to you later. Bye.